President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come down to the floor in support of the resolution, but I'm hoping to use my few minutes to step back from the dizzying torrent of news that we have been delivered, often contradicting sources of news from the president and his advisors, and just ask some basic questions about the wisdom of this extraordinary military endeavor and the administration's future plans in Venezuela. I think the basic question that people are asking in my state, and I imagine the same is true all over the country, is why did we invade Venezuela? Why is our entire national conversation today seized by this question of Venezuela? Why does Senator Kaine have to come to the floor and offer a very simple resolution to clarify that the president doesn't have the authority unilaterally to take military action overseas without the consent of the people? Because for people in Connecticut, they haven't been spending a lot of time over the last 12 months thinking or talking about Venezuela. Venezuela isn't terribly relevant for the people I represent who are worried about an economy that seems to be stagnant, healthcare premiums that are doubling, tripling for many people in my state, prices that are going up on all the stuff that you need to afford to live, and all of a sudden, the president is talking only about Venezuela. So why did we invade Venezuela? Why are we still talking about Venezuela? Well, let's rule out the reasons we know don't hold water. It is not because Venezuela presents a security threat to the United States. There was a reason we went into Afghanistan. However badly that occupation ended, there was a reason we went into Afghanistan. They were harboring a terrorist group that had attacked the United States. Venezuela is not harboring any non-state actors that have plans to attack the United States. The Venezuelan government is not a security threat to the United States of America. So you can cross off that reason. It's not because Venezuela is a security threat to the United States, and everybody basically understands and knows that. Now, the administration spent a lot of time talking about drugs. Their initial forays with respect to military intervention in and around Venezuela were targeting these boats that they claimed were carrying drugs. And, you know, that makes a little bit more sense to the American people because there are thousands of Americans that are dying every year due to overdose. But those overdoses, as people know, are mainly from a drug called fentanyl. Well, Venezuela doesn't produce any fentanyl. What Venezuela produces and ships is cocaine. Now, cocaine can kill you, but that cocaine isn't even coming to the United States. Reports are that 90% of that cocaine is going to Europe. So to the extent we were targeting drug boats off the coast of Venezuela, to the extent that any of the rationale for the action against Maduro had to do with the drug trade, that drug trade doesn't really have anything to do with the American epidemic of overdoses. That will continue unabated, no matter what we're doing in Venezuela. And then it doesn't have anything to do, apparently, with the restoration of democracy in Venezuela or the best interests of the people of Venezuela. Because immediately after the action was taken against Maduro, the Trump administration lined up behind Maduro's second in command, who is, as we speak, ramping up the repression of political speech and political activity in Venezuela. All the bad actors in the Maduro regime, with the exception of Maduro and his wife, are still there, running a kleptocracy, stealing from the Venezuelan people, shipping drugs out of the country, while continuing to destroy the Venezuelan people's ability to protest. So this doesn't have to do with the security threat to the United States. It doesn't have to do with the flow of drugs to the United States. It doesn't have to do with restoring democracy inside Venezuela. And so in those moments and days after the invasion of Venezuela, we were left to wonder, what is it all about? And Donald Trump basically told you. I mean, he did tell you. He said it was about oil. He said that he wants access to Venezuela's oil. He wants the companies that are close to him to have access to Venezuelan oil. Remember, there was this meeting in Florida in which the oil companies came down to see him during the 2024 campaign, and they told him, we'll give you, this is a report, this is not an allegation, this is a mainstream media report. They said, the oil company said they'd give him $1 billion for his campaign in exchange for favorable treatment when he became president. Now, he's already given them a lot of favorable treatment, but boy, this would be a coup. The oil industry having full access to the world's largest petroleum reserve. But today, this morning, in our briefing, we did learn that there is another objective. Yes, Trump wants control of the oil for his friends. But today in our briefing, and also in public remarks, so there is no issue with me sharing this with you, the administration made clear that there is another purpose for seizing the oil, and that is nation building. This is the business we thought we were getting out of. Donald Trump promised the country that he wasn't going to repeat the mistakes that had been made in the past, in which we tried to impose our will on a foreign country through military intervention or the threat of military intervention. But what they are proposing to do is exactly that. It comes in a slightly different form than what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, but it is from the same playbook. Here's their plan. They are going to seize control of Venezuelan oil under the threat of gunpoint, and then they are going to use that oil as leverage to micromanage the government and economy of Venezuela. Let me say it again. We are going to seize Venezuelan oil by gunpoint. We are going to use control of that oil to micromanage the country. That is nation building. That is nation building. And as much as it should worry you that there is not a good national security justification and the only justification for this invasion is to get control of their oil, it should worry you more that now the plan is not just to seize the oil for the purposes of enriching Wall Street and the oil industry. The purpose is to seize the oil so the United States can manage and run the country of Venezuela. Why should regular Americans care about that? Well, first, it is this perpetuation of the same Bush-Cheney fantasy that America can impose its will on a foreign nation through the power of American military force. Now, for now, this looks and feels different than Iraq or Afghanistan because there aren't hundreds of thousands of troops inside Venezuela, but let's make it clear, this is just a different kind of military force because the only way that we get the oil is through a military blockade that is absolutely an act of war, and the threat of another invasion if the leader, whoever it turns out to be, today it's Delcy Rodriguez, who knows who it will be tomorrow, doesn't comply with our wishes. So we are essentially encircling Venezuela with the American military and telling them that if they don't do what we want, we are going to stop and board their ships. We are going to attack their country again. And again, this is not speculation. Donald Trump has said this is the plan, that if they don't do what we want, we'll be right back inside Venezuela. This doesn't work. It has never worked in the past. It is the essence of the quagmire that we got ourselves in Iraq and Afghanistan. The belief, this myopic belief that neocons, that hawks have, that warmongers have, that the United States can use its military to impose our will on a foreign country. And let me tell you, every country is unique and difficult to micromanage from afar, but Venezuela is a complicated country. We're talking about 30 million people. We're talking about active armed insurgency groups. What happens when you try this Iraq-Afghanistan strategy is that in the short term, it breeds resentment and extremism. That's what we saw with the growth of ISIS and the regrowth and reconstitution of the Taliban. And in the long run, the country essentially just decides to wait you out. They knew in Afghanistan we were going to tire at some point and leave. So will the kleptocrats in Venezuela. They'll play ball with us, but at some point the warships are going to leave. At some point America can't devote 1/3 of its Navy to the waters around Venezuela. And as soon as we leave, the kleptocrats, the corrupt leaders will be right back in charge. If they don't want to change their country from within, if there isn't a viable mechanism to do that domestically, it is almost impossible to impose that from the outside. The second reason that Americans should care is that it's illegal. And that's the subject of the resolution. It's illegal. An embargo is an act of war. Repeated military strikes followed on by an invasion is an act of war. And this engagement is not just a hostile act against Venezuela, it will inevitably draw increased frictions with Russia and China. Now, we shouldn't be afraid of friction with Russia and China as a principle. They are our adversaries. But the reason that the Constitution says the people should be in charge of the decision as to whether to enter into military activity in a far-off nation, no matter whether it is a big nation or a small nation, is because there are often spillover impacts and effects. And if we are going to run a long-term naval blockade of Venezuela, if we were going to be running the economy of Venezuela from the White House, the American people have to have a say in that. The founders, in fact, required it. And lastly, the reason that the American people should care about this new plan, the nation building of Venezuela through the threat of military force, is because it is an enormous distraction from what actually matters to the people of this country. And so I will just end where I began. Nobody in the state of Connecticut was asking me for an invasion of Afghanistan prior to the Christmas break. Everybody in my state knows that this has nothing to do with their interests. Lives are going to be lost in this country when millions of people lose their insurance in the coming weeks. There are kids who are going hungry, who are being fed lunch and dinner but not breakfast, or just dinner and not lunch and breakfast because of the nutrition cuts that have been imposed by Republicans. The problems that Americans are facing require a White House that is intent on running the United States of America. But this White House, under the plan that they have revealed today, is going to be running the country of Venezuela. And it is just true that when we were involved in the quagmires in Iraq and Afghanistan, it occupied an enormous amount of time at that White House. The amount of time that the president and his team spent worrying about Baghdad and worrying about Kabul. It was a distraction from the job of running the United States. And so maybe more than any of the other reasons that people should care about this plan to nation build in Venezuela is that it's just even more reason to doubt that this president is sincere at all about doing what he said he was going to do, which is lower costs for people. Costs are going up. Healthcare insurance is disappearing. And the president is telling you that for the foreseeable future, he is going to be spending just as much time thinking about running Venezuela as he is about running the United States. Finally, I will just say, if the Energy Department bill does make it to the floor of the Senate, and it's being debated this week in the House, I will offer an amendment to that bill to prohibit the requisition of Venezuelan oil for the purposes of nation building. That will, of course, be an endeavor that the Energy Department will be involved in. They will likely have to spend millions of dollars, enormous amounts of resources to take control of that oil, to sell it on the open market. That's a disastrous plan, as I've outlined, for America and for the world. And so I will just tell you that we will have a chance to debate this plan if that appropriations measure reaches the Senate, and I would commend my colleagues to take a look at it and support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from